हेलो एवरीवन, जय हिंद एंड वेलकम टू द प्लेटफॉर्म ऑफ श्रीराम्स IAS। आप सभी का स्वागत है श्रीराम्स IAS के प्लेटफॉर्म पर। एंड टुडे विल बी डिस्कसिंग अबाउट COP30 और द कॉन्फ्रेंस ऑफ पार्टीज 30। ऑलरेडी एक हफ्ता जो है वो हो चुका है। इट्स ऑलरेडी बीन 1 वीक सिंस द स्टार्टिंग ऑफ द COP30 एट बेलम इन ब्राजील, जहां पर कि आपका COP30 की कॉन्फ्रेंस आपका चल रही है। और साथ ही साथ यहां पर मैं आपको बताना चाह रहा हूं कि when it comes to the COP30, so today we'll be discussing about the key takeaways, क्या क्या चीजें वहां पर डिस्कस हुई हैं, एंड इवन विल बी डिस्कसिंग अबाउट इंडिया स्ट्रैटेजिक प्रायोरिटीज की क्या वहां पर हमारी स्ट्रैटेजिक प्रायोरिटीज रह सकती है। बिकॉज व्हेन इट कम्स टू COP30 तो वहां पर फाइनेंस आर्किटेक्चर के ऊपर आपका काफी लंबी चौड़ी आपका वहां पर जो है दे हैड बीन discussions that were held, and even the announcement that was made forest protection frameworks के ऊपर and for the evolving carbon markets and indigenous राइट्स रिकॉग्निशन के ऊपर वहां पर आपका एक काफी अच्छा खासा डेलिब्रेशन आपका हुआ। एंड देयर वर सर्टेन अनाउंसमेंट्स दैट वर मेड एट COP30 जो कि आज के सेशन में हम डिस्कस करने वाले हैं। एंड साथ ही साथ व्हाई इट इज इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर UPSC, एंड साथ ही हम ये भी देखेंगे कि UPSC में आपसे इसके बारे में किस तरीके से सवाल पूछे जा सकते हैं, व्हाट काइंड ऑफ क्वेश्चन यू कैन एक्सपेक्ट इन योर अपकमिंग UPSC एग्जामिनेशन। ऑलराइट, सो ये चीज हम आज डिस्कस करेंगे। बट बिफोर मूविंग अहेड, लेट मी टेल यू दैट वी आर ऑफरिंग फ्री 1:1 मेंटरशिप एट श्रीराम्स IAS। और इसके लिए आपको बहुत छोटा सा काम करना है, ठीक है। कभी भी आप कहीं पर भी अटक जाए अपनी प्रिपरेशन में, आपको कोई भी डाउट हो, कोई भी प्रॉब्लम हो, एंड यू आर लुकिंग फॉर द सॉल्यूशन, सो वी हैव द सॉल्यूशन एंड वी आर प्रोवाइडिंग यू विद फ्री 1:1 मेंटरशिप, जहां पर आपको सिर्फ डिस्क्रिप्शन बॉक्स में जो गूगल फॉर्म है या फिर कमेंट में भी आपको वो गूगल फॉर्म मिलेगा, उसको आपको फिल करना है। एंड आवर ट्रस्टेड मेंटर्स विल गेट इन कांटेक्ट विद यू, और आपको पूरा जो भी आपकी प्रॉब्लम है, जो भी डाउट्स है, वो पूरे के पूरे आपका सॉल्व करेंगे। Alright, now coming back to the COP30, why it matters now, उसके बारे में बात करते हैं। because it's been we started when it comes to the climate negotiation. The climate negotiation started with the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, जो आपका that was in Rio in 1992, and later on we adopted Kyoto Protocol, and after the end of the Kyoto Protocol we moved towards the Paris Agreement. And Paris Agreement की बात करें तो that was signed in and that came into force in 2015. And it's been a decade. आज हम 2025 में बात कर रहे हैं। It's been a decade when it comes to the climate action. And साथ ही साथ अगर हम बात करें तो I have told you even in the previous sessions that when it comes to the greenhouse gas emission, तो वो आपका काफी बढ़ चुका है। एंड जो हमारी जो टारगेट ट्रेजेक्ट्री थी कि हमें 1.5 से 2 डिग्री सेल्सियस तक ही आपका जो टेम्परेचर है उसको कंट्रोल करना है, इट इज एक्सीडिंग दैट ट्रेजेक्ट्री एज वेल। सो वी हैव टू सी, एंड अल्टीमेटली जो क्लाइमेट एक्शन है एंड जो क्लाइमेट response towards the global warming, that has to be accelerated, so then only we'll be able to manage the growing or the increasing global warming that we are seeing right now. So over here जो developing nations है, they are at more of risk when it comes to the climate and extreme climatic phenomena, ठीक है। जो developing countries है, developing nations है, उनको ज़्यादा risk है, and that is why their demands is growing more and more, and that is why COP30 matters now. Now जब हम बात करते हैं फर्स्ट वीक की, तो let's discuss what all happened in the first week of COP30, and this is in the brief, and we will discuss it in deep while moving forward in our session. Now, there was climate finance architecture, like new funding mechanism had been laid down, and also the delivery pathway under the intense security is there, and there is a climate finance architecture that is or that has been proposed. ठीक है, इसी के साथ साथ Brazil have a ambitious fund launching, and that is for the tropical forest crisis or forest protection agenda जो है, that was discussed in and also that was at the forelord when it comes to the COP30. And then there was the historic participation level of the indigenous people, and you must have seen that there were protests even when it comes to the COP30 by the indigenous tribes that were there, but the negotiation access have remained limited for these indigenous tribes that were there. And again, indigenous right recognition is one of the things that we'll be discussing in today's session. And the another thing is the Article 6 that gives that lays down the foundation for the carbon market rules, that its implementation is gaining momentum with the major economies aligning with the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Now, यहाँ पर आपको याद रखना है कि Article 6 is about the carbon market that is there, because that could be asked in your UPSC Prelims examination. All right, now the first thing that we'll be discussing is the loss and damage fund. ठीक है, जो लॉस एंड डैमेज फंड है, यहां पर आपका जो है, अगर मैं बात करूं तो देयर हैड बीन प्रपोजल, द फर्स्ट कॉल ऑफ प्रपोजल इज फॉर $250 million इनिशियल फंडिंग पैकेज जो यहां पर आपका अनाउंस की गई है लॉस एंड डैमेज फंड में फॉर द क्लाइमेट वल्नरेबल नेशंस दैट आर देयर, जो कि आपका एक्सट्रीम क्लाइमेट वल्नरेबिलिटी से जूझ रहे हैं। उन क्लाइमेट वल्नरेबल नेशंस के लिए आपका लॉस एंड डैमेज फंड जो है ये आपका प्रपोज किया गया, एंड दिस हैज बीन अनाउंस्ड। $250 million का ये आपका फंड है। However, when it comes to the scale, so there would be grants जो कि आपका up to $20 million आपके दिए जाएंगे per project, and the deployment target is by mid of 2026. Mid 2026 से आपका ये जो financing है that will be provided. At the same time, it is very, very important to note over here that the developing nations, they have cautiously welcome this loss and damage fund जो $250 million का है, because when it comes to the amount of the fund, it is very, very insufficient when it comes to the vulnerabilities. And even अगर मैं बात करूं जो annual loss and damage है, that is in developing countries that has already crossed $400 billion, तो $400 billion का annual जो है लॉस एंड डैमेज ऑलरेडी आपका क्रॉस कर चुका है। एंड हियर वी आर प्रपोजिंग एंड वी आर डेवलपिंग अ फंड, लॉस एंड डैमेज फंड, जहां पर हमने जो इनिशियल फंडिंग रखी है दैट इज $250 million फॉर द वेरियस पर्पसेस दैट आर देयर। Now, I have already told you when it comes to the vulnerabilities and even the amount of the fund that is required, that is $1.3 trillion that is actually needed. Now, over here, when it comes to the finance blueprint, all right, so there has been a comprehensive report that outlines specific mechanism and even the timelines to mobilize climate finance at unprecedented scales. That is कि हम ये $1.3 trillion का जो पैकेज है इसको हम कर सके। ठीक है, half the funding will come from the private sector. ओवर हियर ये बहुत ही अच्छा एक इंप्रूवमेंट है जो मैं आपसे कहूंगा। ठीक है कि when we talk about the expectation, half of the funding that must flow from the private sector, and over here the pledge announcement have shifted to the delivery architecture and even accountability when it comes to COP30. All right, over here the first and the most important thing is that multilateral development banks, bilateral commitments and concessional loans have been the foundational feature of this roadmap. Even along with this, private capital mobilization has been seeked. ठीक है, जो private capital है, जो private sector है, उनको involve करने की बात है, so that we can de-risk we have the de-risking instruments. ठीक है, we have blended the finance along with green bonds and the carbon markets. ठीक है, अगर इसके बात करें तो वी हैव द कंट्री प्लेटफॉर्म, सेक्टर स्पेसिफिक फंड्स एंड डायरेक्ट एक्सेस मोडालिटीज that will help in the delivery mechanisms, and also there would be a transparent tracking, reporting system and compliance verification जो आपका accountability framework को आपका जो है establish करता है। Now there had been another when we come to the new actors, all right, so when we are talking about another fund that has been proposed and announced in COP30 is actually a $300 million health climate fund. अब ये जो health climate fund है, this has been proposed and announced for the different health impacts that the extreme climate is it is implementing. और जितने भी आपके एक्सट्रीम क्लाइमेट इवेंट्स हैं उनकी वजह से जितना भी आपका हेल्थ पर इंपैक्ट हो रहा है, ठीक है, चाहे वो आपका एक्सट्रीम हीट स्ट्रेस है, एयर पॉल्यूशन है, डिजीज वेक्टर शिफ्ट है, सो फॉर दिस देयर हैड बीन अ $300 million हेल्थ फंड और हेल्थ क्लाइमेट फंड जो कि आपका जो है दैट हैज बीन प्रपोज्ड एंड अनाउंस्ड, एंड ओवर हियर When it comes to the philanthropic foundations, they are increasingly, they are shaping the adaptation priorities and even the project selection criteria that is there. And over here, there is a critical question that has been raised, and that is about the accountability, democratic legitimacy of this fund, and even the power concentration in the global climatic governance that we are seeing right now. So again, over here, you can find a question in your UPSC mains that will deal with, examine the role of non-state actors in international environmental governance, the benefits of it, and also the democratic deficit concerns that it poses in the future. All right, so there is another fund that has been proposed and announced, that is $300 million health climate fund at the COP30. Now, the next thing is there had been 86 new NDC that have been proposed. Now, NDC are nationally determined contributions. हर एक नेशन अपना एक nationally determined contribution आपका propose करता है कि कितना वो greenhouse gas emission कम करेगा. So there had been 86 new nationally determined contribution or NDCs which have been proposed, and this NDCs जो आपके new proposals हैं that are projected to decrease 12% emission by 2035 compared to the 2019 baseline that we have. तो 12% ये आपका emission reduction करेगा, but at the same time, when I have already told you in the previous session as well that the greenhouse gas concentration is increasingly rising and they are hitting the record highs annually. At the same time, जो आपका जो projected decrease है, ये अगर projected decrease होता भी है तो उसके बाद भी जो amount of the temperature, ठीक है, the amount of the warming that will be there throughout the globe, that will rise to about 2.6 degrees Celsius. ये आपका इस trajectory पर है, and this exceeds the Paris targets जो कि आपका 1.5 से 2 degrees Celsius तक हमने जो है target रखा था during the Paris agreement. So there is a gap that persists. All right. So what the country are pledging, all right, what the countries they are nationally determining in terms of their contribution, and what science demand, it remains misaligned and dangerously misaligned when it comes to the projections of the increase of the temperature when we talk about the Paris Agreement. All right. Now, there is another fund that has been, or the finance that has been pushed by Brazil, and that deals with the tropical forest. वो आपका tropical forest के लिए है, और this is a initiative जहां पर $25 billion को target किया गया है forest rich nations के लिए, where the ecosystem, the tropical forest, they provide the various ecosystem benefits. Now, the current pledges are basically approximately $5.5 billion जो है that had been committed so far, and it is barely 22% of the target amount. What is the target amount? It is $25 billion when it comes to the tropical forest financing that has been done. And over here, this had been a center stage of the Brazil. ठीक है, ब्राजील ने इस फंड को आपका प्रपोज किया, and it deals with the global climate architecture, because when it comes to the tropical forest, we know that they control the climate when it comes to the tropical countries as well. All right, so this represents a fundamental shift where forest moving from the peripheral conservation issue to the core climate financing mechanism has been seen in COP30 or COP30. All right, now what is the geopolitics behind this forest financing? So when it comes to the European nation have joined along with US and even some of the developing countries, they have joined the Brazil Forest Finance Initiative, but at the same time, China has declined. All right, China declines its participation in the Forest Fund Coalition, although there is massive ecological footprint in China when it comes to the tropical forest as well. All right, here Brazil have emphasized on the South-South cooperation as well as the solidarity over the North-South cooperation and the aid models, and there is a growing demand where the forest-rich nations, they will come collectively and they demand the substantially stronger compensation mechanism when it comes to the forest funding or the forest financing that has been proposed. Alright, so जो forest nations है, the forest nation, they're forming the independent negotiation bloc that is parallel to the OPEC's energy market influence, and that has to be seen during the COP30. Now, there was a protest when it comes to the indigenous tribes. They protested at the COP30 venue. Now, when it comes to the COP30, there had been historic participation when it comes to the indigenous tribes that were there. There were 2,500 indigenous participants who attended this COP30 events and even the surrounding forums that had been there along with the COP30. However, it is very important to note that only 360 were accredited to the blue zone. That is, blue zone is the official negotiation space where the decisions happen. Alright, there is 80 million hectares of indigenous land rights that have to be legally recognized by 2030, and even this represents the substantial acknowledgement of the indigenous stewardship role in the forest commitment. So over here, the indigenous communities, they achieve unprecedented visibility at the COP30, yet the structural barriers, they limit their direct influence in the formal negotiation processes that was seen during the COP30 during the COP30 events. Now, over here, there were protesters who stormed COP30 demanding the genuine representation. The indigenous people, they demanded their genuine representation and even meaningful participation in the decision-making process. Alright, at the same time, there was vocal opposition to perceived corporate influence that was seen during the COP30 over the climate negotiation and even the policy frameworks. And also there was strong call for addressing immediate environmental concerns and injustice which is affecting these indigenous tribes and the host communities and the vulnerable population that is there in the Amazon, in the heart of the Amazon, because Amazon is one of the region where you will find indigenous tribal groups which lives there and they thrive there and they survive there. Alright, so when it comes to the gap between the official participation of the indigenous people towards their right, and even when it comes to the the amount of the people who have been inducted into the blue zone. So there is a mismatch between these different groups which have been proposed. Now over here there had been another controversy, that is agri-zone controversy. Now there are certain corporate sector players or the private sector players which are involved with the agri-businesses. Like for example, we have Nestle, we have Bayer, we have Cargill and the others. Alright, they have maintained significant presence. Their presence was significant when it comes to COP30 in Belém and Brazil. Alright, over here the critics have highlighted that there is fundamental tension. This fundamental tension comes from the agriculture expansion that drives the deforestation, because these are agri-businesses. They thrive on the business, and for the business they need large chunk of land for the agriculture, and that will lead to deforestation. Yet these companies, they shape land use policy discussions as well. So there is fundamental tension between these agri-businesses which have been, or they have or their presence was significant during the COP30 negotiation, and this raises critical governance question about the corporate sector influence on the forest protection frameworks and the land rights regulation negotiation as well. Now over here again you can expect another question in your UPSC that can deal with that: how can the meaningful forest conservation emerge from negotiation where deforestation drivers have the privileged access to the COP30 like platform. Alright, the next comes the carbon markets. That is, I told you it is there in the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Now when it comes to the carbon markets, over here there is new alliance that aims to harmonize the carbon market that is there and the regulations, and even to ensure the environmental integrity. And the major participants in this new alliance that has been formed is basically we have UK, we have European Union and China even, which have joined the discussion despite that they have different and divergent economic aspects or the interests that they have. Now over here, what are the focus areas? The Article 6 implementation rules and the transparency requirements that are there for the carbon markets, as well as the common baseline standards which prevents double counting of the carbon markets, as well as verification methodologies, as well as compliance mechanism, and the benefit sharing with the local community. Now over here, India has a robust opportunity when it comes to the carbon market. All right, we have a robust opportunity because when it comes to the carbon market, India's carbon market, it could unlock significant revenue that we can earn from, trading the carbon, the funds that we have, the renewable energy that we are, producing, and even we have forest carbon offset projects. So through this, we can earn significant revenue in the carbon market in the future. And that is why this poses a very significant opportunity for India in the future. All right. Next comes, this is the first time in any of the COP or Conference of the Parties that there was a declaration that was signed. Now, this declaration has been signed by 12 countries, and this is for a groundbreaking commitment that these countries have, signed this declaration for. This is Information Integrity Declaration. Now, you must have seen, I have told you even in the previous session when we were discussing about the new ice age. All right, so there is the misinformation that could spread in the era that we are living in. We have, or you can see that the era that we are living is an era where the information, it passes through, or it, transports from one place to the another in just blink of seconds. So at the same time, this is the first COP that have formally addressed the climate misinformation as the governmental threat. And for this, they have signed an Information Integrity Declaration, and it acknowledges that any misinformation undermines the climate action and even the public support. So this is very, very significant. Why it is significant? Because it establishes that the information integrity is integral part and integral to the effective climate governance, and not just the peripheral concern that we are seeing in today's session or in today's era. Now, there are certain emerging trends which are reshaping the climate governance, as we have seen during the COP30 or the COP30. The first thing is that the climate finance have evolved beyond traditional state-to-state flows. They have private capital, we have philanthropy, we have blended instruments which are now central to the climate financing needs. And over here, we can say that we need to look for the multi-actor finance models, and we should be able to finance $1.3 trillion that is needed for combating the climate change and the vulnerabilities that the climate change will possess in the future. At the same time, we have indigenous rights, we have environmental justice and equity considerations which are increasingly embedded into the climate framework, and the right-based approach that I have told you even before, that is finding its place during the COP30 that is right now taking place at Belém in Brazil. All right, there is tropical forest countries developing independent negotiations and negotiating position, challenging the traditional power structure. There is forest nation bloc that is forming, which is discussing about preserving the tropical forests which are there. Along with this, we have carbon market restructure or re-architecture, where major economies have collaborated on the unified standards, whether it is and when it comes to the unified standards. So this is a paradigm shift when it comes to the framework of fragmented voluntary markets that we have seen in the previous COPs or Conference of Parties. Now, why or what this means for the global South? We are talking about South-to-South cooperation when it comes to the various negotiations in the international fora. Now, when it comes to the global South, there is clear acknowledgement that adaptation and loss and damage financing must match the scale of climate impacts and not just the donor convenience. So there is adaptation and loss recognition. At the same time, there is growing resistance to Western-dominated market mechanism that fail to address historical responsibility and equity as well. So there is pushback against the Western structures that was seen during the COP30, and even the horizontal cooperation among the developing nation is gaining visibility, especially after US has taken itself out from the COP30, all right, and negotiating leverage in the climate forum between the developing countries, and that is fostering or that is strengthening the South-to-South alliance in the climate financing and climate change mitigation that we are seeing. Now, what is the direct relevance for India about the negotiations as well as the announcement that have been made in the first week of COP30. Now, over here, the loss and damage fund is critical to India, because when it comes to extreme weather events, when it comes to extreme climate events, India have faced severe threat, whether it is because of the floods, because of the drought, because of the cyclones and the heat waves as well. So this fund access becomes a strategic priority for India. At the same time, I told you that we have rapid expansion when it comes to renewable energy. So we are rapidly expanding our renewable energy, as well as afforestation programs. We have RED Plus programs, which we are, which we are promoting. And this all will generate substantial carbon market for India in the future. And ultimately, the carbon market opportunity holds importance for India again. And then when it comes to India again, the international forest funds, they align perfectly with India's Green India mission and the compensatory afforestation schemes that we are running, like for example CAMPA. So again, forest finance is aligned with the India's domestic policies that we are following. And then we have the global indigenous rights discourses that connects directly with the we have different traditional and we have the tribes which we have, all right, indigenous tribes which are living in the forest. So the India's Forest Rights Act and the PISA implementation challenges. So these are the parallels that we can draw when it comes to the indigenous rights which have been proposed during the COP30, the first week. Now, India must leverage the global South solidarity that we have seen during the negotiations, and we must have, or these are the different direct relevance that we have for India when it comes to the COP30. Now, what are the key strategic interests of India during COP30? So the first one is that there is, secure, reliable and long-term finance should be available, all right, with simplified access mechanism for the adaptation and mitigation projects, all right. So there have to be a predictable climate finance when it comes to the finance mechanism that have been discussed at the COP30. At the same time, when we are talking about carbon markets, all right, they have to be promoted, and at the same time, the rules must recognize historical emission to ensure that fair pricing prevent the greenwashing and benefits for the developing countries, because we have seen that the developed countries have already emitted lots of greenhouse gas emission, and right now also the US has taken itself out from the Paris Agreement because it plans on more of greenhouse gas emission and does not want to cut down the fossil fuel consumption when it comes to the national policy during the Trump's administration. All right, at the same time, when it comes to the forest light alignment, we have the various domestic policies that we have that govern the forest as well as the forest the dwellers which we have, and we have provided different rights to these forest dwellers, whether it is through the Forest Rights Act, and we have different programs and the schemes which we are running right now. So they align with India's domestic policies, that align with the rights-based approaches while maintaining the national sovereignty as well. And at the same time, when it comes to the information integrity, the climate communication framework will get strengthened and counter misinformation while protecting the democratic discourse as well. So again, these are the different strategic interests that lies for India at COP30. All right, at the same time, when it comes to the linkages, where you will find the questions related to this in your UPSC. So it is not just environment where you can find the question related to it. You can find the question related to this in your international relations in GS paper 2. All right, where climate diplomacy, multilateral negotiations, as well as global South alliances are very important, and even for the governance as well, where known as non-state actors are acting now, or they are important in the global governance mechanism. All right, at the same time, yes, it holds importance for your environment paper as well, but at the same time, the climate finance architecture, public-private partnership in the climate financing and the green bonds, they are important for your economics as well, and you can find question related to this in your essay as well. All right, now what we have to see during the next COP30, when it comes to the second week of the COP30, what we have to see is that what are the finance architecture details. All right, when it comes to the 1.3 trillion roadmap, All right, what concrete mechanism had been laid down, and also the loss and damage fund operationalization had been proposed. So all this we have to see during the second week of COP30. At the same time, when it comes to Article 6 implementation rules and verification standards, so that we have to see for the carbon market finalization. At the same time, forest agenda outcome or the forest financing that have been proposed by the Brazil have to be seen, and whether the pledged amount is reached or not. All right, at the same time, we have to see whether the participation translates into the formal recognition of the indigenous tribes, into negotiation, and also in the decision-making structures, and the official statement on finance commitments, carbon markets, and equity principle in the final declaration from the India's side. So all these things we have to see during the second week of COP30. All right, so stay alert as well as stay informed and stay tuned for more such important updates related to the COP30 that is being taken place, or it is right now taking place at the Belém in Brazil. So that would be all in today's session. I hope that you have a complete gist what happened in 1 week or the first week of the COP30. I'll be back again if there would be any major thing that will be discussed at COP30. But all these things, the crux have to be there in your mind when we'll be discussing about COP30 in detail in our session. So that would be all. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care. Jai Hind. Please do not forget to like, share as well as subscribe to our channel for more such frequent updates. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care and Jai Hind.